This is Annabelle Gauberti and you are listening to Lawfully Creative. My chance to talk with professionals in the creative industries to hear their stories, what inspires their creation, what decisions change their careers, and what relationships influence their work. Today's episode is brought to you by Crefovi, our London and Paris-based law firm focused on advising the creative industries. Subscribe to our podcast, Lawfully Creative, or catch up with our original shows on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Hello, podcast listeners. This is our second podcast of 2017. I am sorry that I have not been more able to edit and release in the public domain the several podcasts that I recorded in the last few months. I have been very busy, in particular with a tax investigation with the French HMRC, IRS, Administration des Impôts, who is proving to be very demanding and thorough in its investigation of my whole taxes. So everything is going fine. I am providing all the information to these guys, but it is taking an enormous amount of my time. So since the beginning of 2017, I spent around 170 hours just going through all my accounts for 2014, 2015, and I haven't done yet 2016. It's going to come very soon. And basically running around, finding all my invoices and reviewing all my ledgers, etc., and also liaising with Crefovi's accountant. We had an upsurge of matters and work, which is fantastic news, and we are really delighted with really interesting and dynamic clients coming our way. And in the aftermath of the Cannes Film Festival, I thought it would be very relevant to release my podcast done with Phil Turner, who is a London-based film producer and director, which we recorded on the 26th of April 2017 at the Hospital Club in London. So here goes, podcast listeners. Have a great time, and don't hesitate if you have any questions to contact us at Crefovi on contact@crefovi.com. With Phil Turner. Phil is a mate that I met a long time ago now, probably 5 or 6 years ago, at HTB. What does it stand for, HTB?
Holy Trinity Bronson.
Sorry, yes, which is a Church of England congregation, and I used to go there from time to time before I founded my firm, and I had existential questions as to whether I should found my law firm Crefovi focusing on the creative industries. So I went to HTB, and through that I met Phil. So probably 5, 6 years ago. How are you, Phil?
I'm very well, thank you.
The reason probably we stayed in touch with Phil is that Phil also is deeply involved in the creative industries on the film side.
Yes.
How would you describe your current occupation, Phil?
Director-producer. I've been one for scarily more than 20 years now. I started out as a 3D animator in the very early days of 3D.
Really?
In 93. Good grief, 93.
Were you working in London or in Shepperton or
in London and Norwich? So I was in Wardour Street. That's where our main office was.
Okay.
And then I was using Acrobat, and we had Softimage as well. And then I became a producer. The next year, I decided I just wanted to produce and direct. Went into broadcast from there. So,
what were you producing at the time?
Creative services largely. Creative services for various broadcasters. I launched and helped relaunch 4 TV companies. So there are a lot of startups as the Sky satellite system started getting going. Select TV, Carlton Select, TCC. I relaunched that. I launched the Trouble Channel. Yeah, it was quite creative, fun sort of stuff, really. And you're really in at the beginning of satellite TV. It felt like
that was in the early 90s to the end of the 90s.
Mid 90s for me, anyway. But early to mid 90s, yeah. After working at pretty much every broadcast company in London, I worked for Scandinavian broadcasters too, Viasat, for every channel that they have.
Viasat, that's what they're called.
Viasat on a freelance basis. Yeah, They have a lot of channels under their umbrella. Very much like Sky for Scandinavia. For a while I was at the BBC launching a lot of their new shows and things on BBC Two, and then went totally freelance.
So a lot of TV work
Yeah, lots of
mainly.
TV work in the beginning.
And then you went totally freelance to launch your own company, Film Turner
.tv
Productions.tv.
and filmturnerproductions.com. Yeah, exactly. And just went around the world, did tribal documentaries, frontline documentaries.
Military stuff as well, I noticed.
Lots of military stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love working with them, been on lots of expeditions with them. I've trained a lot with some of their great PTIs, and I've made recruitment films for them as well. So that's great. But also broadcast work, expedition broadcast work, and yeah, I might have another one coming up with the military next year.
Fantastic.
The RAF are celebrating big anniversary next year, and they want possibly me to come along on an expedition, but I think I can't really talk about much.
Sure.
But
Fingers crossed for you,
yes.
Matt.
Oh, hope so, yeah.
When did you develop your skills as a director? Did you go to university here in the UK, or?
Yeah, Kent, or Kayad it was then, but it became part of Kent University. I feel that probably some of the people I've met that went straight into the industry probably learned more than they did people that I know who went to art college. And I know a lot of my fellow graduates didn't get into the business.
Really?
Did running for a few years and earned very little money. And were making cups of tea for people that had actually just been someone's PA for the first job in the industry, and then became a producer straight off the back of that. So it doesn't seem particularly fair. And I think probably going on a media degree doesn't help that many people, to be honest.
What do you think?
I think the only thing it helps you with is to get a bit of time to produce your work without any limitations, using their equipment, to absolutely define the kind of work that you want to do and make it look as professional as you possibly can.
Right. Well, that's a skill set in itself, isn't it? Because
it is.
I mean, especially at the time, that was what, in the late 80s or the beginning of the 90s, I suppose, that you went to uni. It was probably work done on celluloid as well, mostly, not digital, yeah?
Yeah,
So
60 mil and
yeah, it's pretty technical, isn't it?
It is. You do learn some stuff, and you do get a passion for it, and you get to explore that passion. And for me, it was the new technology. The vision always came before the technical process. So if I had an idea of what visually I wanted to produce, because I started off as an illustrator, a technical illustrator, a photorealist. I loved producing work that looked like photographs, but actually was using the airbrush, using very, very fine painting tools. And I thought, how can I do that with film? And how can I have a vision and then just see that vision through after having a vision? And that was what launched me into learning what I've learned in 3D animation, post-production compositing, all the grading tools, all the special effects tools that I use nowadays. That it didn't start off as a technical issue. It started off as a creative challenge, and the technical always followed. So any job I've had, usually I've had a vision of what to achieve, and then how do I technically achieve that? And I've usually learned from the best in the business, because you're always sitting next to them or over their shoulder, and then eventually you say, well, would you mind moving over and letting me operate that for a while and try seeing if I can do this? How
interesting. So it's mainly trial and error as opposed to opening a book and learning from...
Well, now it's all website based. So if you wanted to learn something complex like Maya, which is a fantastic 3D animation software package, and you can... There are a few good ones out there. 3D Mac, Studio Max is good, I think. Cinema 4D is very user-friendly and a very easy one to learn from the outset. I know Sky use that one a lot, and they've been trying to persuade me to take that up, because then our work will be compatible and I would be able to easily work with their teams on projects if I wanted to. Yeah. Maya is pretty much the can-do-all animation program, probably the one most used by people like Pixar.
Really? And for special effects?
You can do special effects, character animation, you have fluid effects, and lots of plugins like fume effects for explosions and that type of thing. You can basically do anything you want if you have a good enough idea and you learn technically how to put it together in Maya, and then can composite it afterwards in a number of programs. After Effects is probably the best known. And you can, with After Effects and Maya, you can probably produce almost anything that you can possibly imagine nowadays.
Thank you for that. That's helpful to know what are the best software in the industry.
There's a lot of good software, and there's probably a lot better high-end software than After Effects, but it just shows that someone can actually start producing the kind of effects that 10 years ago would have cost millions and only high-end movies could afford. You can now have kids producing these same effects in their bedrooms using this kit, which is very affordable.
The same is happening in the music industry, where kids are actually in the bedroom creating all albums, and then they put them on Spotify, etc., and some of them just explode through the charts. So it's true, it's a reality. Your take is that perhaps having a film degree is not going to help you much in your career, and maybe you're better off just being an intern with a great film producer or a great film director.
Quite possibly. I think we reached saturation point with film degrees probably 10 years ago, where they estimated about half of all degrees were media degrees in the UK. And obviously there aren't that many jobs. There are some jobs out there, but if you're going to do a media degree, you've got to choose it very carefully and very well, and you've got to choose something that's very much professionally biased, not something that's going to be all basically Russian theory. Yes, it's great to look back at Tarkovsky and Eisenstein, but basically any kid watching enough movies is going to have enough understanding of the visual language of film to know a good film from a bad film when they watch it. The film language is constantly evolving. Yes, you need to be up to date with that, but you need to be technically professional.
It's not probably, according to you, it's not something that you really learn in a school.
And have a vision. No, probably in some schools, yes. I think there are some very good 3D animation schools nowadays, but you could do, rather than do that even, I would buy the program any way you can, get any job, and get hold of Maya, Cinema 4D, or whatever, and then get on lynda.com. And
Lynda.com.
Yes, you'll have the best people teaching you these very complex programs. You'll have the screen layout, and they'll just click on everything and show you exactly how to do it. One-to-one tuition for something like $300 a year, which is probably better tuition than you'll ever get at university or in an art school.
In a way, it's the exact opposite of being an elitist, you know. So basically, what you are
democratized.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
It became very democratic to get into the film industry. I think this is probably also why it's one of the creative industries where there are so many people who can't really live out of a passion, of a skills as well. For example, in fashion, you can't keep on having a fashion business if you're just not successful financially.
Yes.
But in film, I guess probably also because there are such low barriers to entry, and nowadays you just need a good camera, and all the software is available, and all the basically tuitions are available almost for free online.
Yes.
You can easily become, a film director or something.
Well, with cameras for a while, they became quite cheap and easy. It became that was a democratizing factor as well in production. Yeah. Now they're starting to get expensive again, although they are getting better and better and better all the time.
Like Red, for example?
Yes, that's a great production camera. Yeah. You use different cameras for different types of things. Just doing a run-around shoot type thing for a documentary, and you wanted to get good sound coming into your camera through a radio mic, you might just use an F55, which is Sony, and Sony are great for producing cameras that are broadcast quality, but you can pretty much use it as a one-man band. But then if you wanted to go up and have a sound man with your production, and you'd probably use something like Alexa, which I use quite a bit. And I love being a one-man band. I learned all this stuff from some of the best people. Eventually, I don't bother hiring DOPs unless they're the best DOPs in the business, because the news-type cameramen that you can normally get for that kind of price, you might as well do it yourself. So
DOPs being director of photography?
Yes. You learn a lot from those guys, definitely. I love shooting my own footage. Going out with the military anyway, on expedition, you have to pretty much be a one-man production team.
Lean.
Because you're going to have to get through a kind of selection process with them, just that you're accepted by the team, that you hold your weight in the team. And they're not going to want too many civvies messing things up for them. So,
or slowing them down.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. It's great for tribal work as well. It's great for frontline work. It's great for expedition.
What do you mean tribal work?
Well, I've lived with a lot of tribes.
Really?
Yeah, and filming them.
Whereabouts?
South America. I suppose a couple in Africa as well, and been to some very remote regions there. but mostly South America, people like the Chimani tribe, and that was a great experience.
So what came out of it? Did you do a documentary?
Oh yeah, that was for Discovery Europe. Yeah.
Oh wow. Oh,
So
awesome.
they generally, you want to multitask nowadays too, as much as you possibly can. I think there are a lot of directors out there who are saved by the crew that they have around them. They don't necessarily have much of a vision, very loose grip of the technical process, and maybe a little experience with actors. But they might, just being a storyteller isn't enough nowadays. And I think as a director, you want to really get to grips with all the kit from beginning to end, from the first second of production to the last bit of post-production. And if you can get a handle on all of that and you know exactly the processes, and it's a lifetime process of keeping up with all this stuff because it's constantly changing as well, then you will probably end up seeing your vision realized. And that's the point of directing, seeing your vision realized. If you don't have that grip on all of those technical processes, you'll always rely on a big crew, and you'll always rely on a very, very good crew to save your bacon every time. And I think there are a lot of pretty bad directors out there making quite a lot of big movies that they work with the same people every time.
Or maybe they just like them and they just created a team around them.
Sometimes that's the case, yeah.
So are you saying that a lot of directors are mainly focusing on the pre-production, i.e. the script writing process, or?
I think there are a lot of writers that become directors.
Okay.
There are different ways of becoming a director. I suppose you can write your own scripts and then insist on directing your own scripts.
Right.
Or there are those who make a lot of short films, and then they end up directing a feature. You've got to be very careful about the first feature you direct.
Okay.
Because I think there are a lot of first-time feature directors and not very many second-time feature directors. I think a lot of people take for granted what it takes to make a film. A big crew,
It's
people
a big
that know
process.
Yeah, and actually I've spent my life, I think, learning every aspect of that process, to the extent that I could now make a feature film on my own, potentially, but with actors, as a single crewman with the actors. And I think
you do also the editing.
I love all the editing. I've edited all my own stuff for about 20 years since the BBC.
You're good at money.
To some extent, you need that in the beginning anyway, I think, because you won't be able to afford a big crew and a very good big crew in the very outset. Even on the smaller projects that you get, if you're working with crew, often a new director will get bullied and they'll be told, oh, that won't work, that won't work, that won't work. And a lot of people won't know that actually what their vision will work. It just requires them to understand the process a little bit better to say, that will work, do what I want you to do. And actually
do it that way.
Yeah. Directing means being sometimes the most unpopular person on set, which is another good reason to learn all the jobs yourself, so that you absolutely can nail everything that you want to do, and you know how you want the thing lighting, you know the kind of lighting, you know what you're going to do with regard to post-production and the special effects, and what CGI you're going to put in there, and how you're going to have to shoot it to enable that. And that saves you a lot of money, saves you a lot of time, and if you know those processes, then you'll get your vision realised. I mean, there's a lot of compromise, I think, in the media through people that don't really have a vision and don't really have an understanding of how to gain that.
I listened to the podcast of Kermode and Mayo on the BBC, and so they review new films. And recently, one of the criticisms in relation to the last Fast and Furious film, which was released, I think, a couple of weeks ago from a big franchise, which has made more money than Star Wars, by the way, the big franchise, Fast and Furious. I don't think I've watched any of them, but nonetheless. And so what they were saying is the last Fast and Furious is just too much on the special effects side, and it's moving all over the place, and everything is special effects. And two of the critics said on that particular podcast, Kermode and Mayo, they should take the example of John Wick 2, where a lot of the stunts are actually done by real people. You know, they're not CGI augmented or something. It's funny to see actually that a lot of films are, allegedly enhanced by visual effects and CGI, but at the same time, the visual effects industry is also dying. I heard another podcast, Economics, where they were saying the whole Californian visual effects industry has just completely disappeared over the years. They had to relocate to Canada because of tax reasons, or in Europe, in London, because visual effects are subcontracted and it's just there's not enough money in that anymore. So
that's probably true, and it's become so easy for anyone to get into visual effects.
Right. Maybe this is why the quality has gone down as well of visual effects.
Well, I think there's no excuse for that. I've seen it in a few films, and the films have always been... I think there are one or two films I can't mention that I know people that were involved in them, and I know the reason behind the CGI being really poor on them.
Okay.
But generally, it's very easy now to produce good visual effects, and it's very easy to produce almost anything that you might want with CGI. I think storytelling, though, has always been an important part of directing. Though earlier I might have said, just people that can storytell and have the technical ability, I might sound as though I'm contradicting myself, but I actually believe that the storytelling aspect is the very first thing you have to master, and then you get everything else as well.
I think a lot of people in the industry agree with you that you need a good script, a good story to tell.
Well, I understand people like Alex Proyas are getting a bit upset with the movie industry because they just want to regurgitate.
Sorry. Who is Alex Proyas?
Oh, Proyas. He made great films like The Crow, Dark City.
Oh, okay.
That kind
Film
of thing.
director.
Yes, and he got pretty upset. He made a film with a friend of mine a little while ago called Knowing, and he doesn't think that Hollywood wants to produce anything but old regurgitated proven formulas that will get the money in. Yeah, to some extent anyone can make a movie now. The kind of budgets they're spending are on the stars and getting those kinds of characters involved. They have to have a proven formula to get the money back. But storytelling, as in The Godfather, makes that kind of film timeless. And I can still look back and say that's one of my favourite films ever. Through the 80s, we had great special effects with people like Spielberg and George Lucas. And you look at those films and you think, marvellous, absolutely. They've changed the whole face of escapism because you can actually believe the vision that they had and they followed it through. Maybe a bit later, Lucas lost the plot a little bit with The Phantom Menace and thought that special effects could still carry him through an entire movie. Whereas in fact, storytelling was always what made his films so great in the early days.
True.
And I think you can never let go of that. There is a problem at the moment with money making, proven formulas, and getting good people involved to actually want to do that kind of filmmaking.
On this note, money making process and the proven formula, as you say, I belong to an association of professionals involved in the film industry in Paris called ASECA. So we meet up every 2 months, etc. And on last Friday we had this déjeuner, so this lunch as well as debate, and that was about the film en déshérence, so films which are not being exploited. And what do you do with the assets? Now, film itself, or the assets around the film, and when it's not being exploited by the producer. Well, there is an obligation in the French law for a producer to exploit. And so I asked, out of curiosity, how many films are not exploited in France? And they said only 25% of films being shot are actually exploited. And the rest is not. I asked the financiers in the room, why do you finance such films? I mean, how come you don't check, whether there's going to be a sales or distribution package tied into the deal so that you make sure you get your return on your investment? I mean, that's what they do. Talent agencies like CAA and WME in Hollywood. Why don't we have the same thing in France or maybe in Europe? So my question to you is, how come Europe seems to be so unprofessional compared to the Hollywood way of doing things, where they prepackage the whole thing? I mean, I'm reading at the moment a really useful and interesting book called CAA, The Powerhouse, Building of a Powerhouse, where they explain to you that CAA, Creative Artist Agency, which was founded in 1975, they basically have as a roster of clients the best film producers, the best film directors, script writers, and also the best actors, and then they just package deals. So they take one of their film directors on their roster, and then a couple of actors, and then they speak to the sales agents and also to big studios to basically arrange a distribution deal. And it seems to be so well organized and so a really smooth process in the US. And well, I am under the impression that here in Europe it's much more DIY, so to speak, and with and a lot of vanity projects. I mean, at the end of the day, if only at least in France, if only 25% of the films are being exploited commercially, it means that 75% of the films are just vanity projects by some film directors. So, how do you make sure that you still have this hold on reality and that your film projects are, commercially viable?
Yeah, I think they have some pretty tough producers over in the States as well, and they'll keep you to your script, your schedule, to your budget, and everything else as well. It is a business.
Yeah.
A lot of the funding actually probably comes through hedge funds and things like that. People looking to spend their money on an interesting project, but also to gain some of the tax perks and that kind of thing too. And I know that there are, obviously funding bodies here as well, and generally the budgets tend to be a lot smaller than the States.
Okay.
And so it enables you to take a few more risks. And if you do actually just get a small proportion of your films making a profit here, and you make, say, 7 and 1 or 2 of them just get through, the budgets are usually so small that you're still going to make a profit from the 1 or 2 that actually get made. Probably where it's big business, and when you're in the States and you're actually making a lot of money, they are much more on the ball with regard to keeping you on the straight and narrow. I've got a friend that's just made a film called The Shack, and I think he's...
This is the guy who wrote a script about Moses.
Oh yes, Stu. Yeah. He's I think he's a good guy and he's quite talented, and he's just made a film out there and probably had to jump through many hoops to get into that position to make a feature film as well. But even then, the studio will be very firm, and it'll be the studio that produced Life of Pi and other great films that...
So who bought this film, The Shack? Which studio? A major studio?
Probably, yes. And they'll be just distributing in the UK in June.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. But the kind of thing that I'm involved in at the moment would be very low budget in comparison to that. That had Sam Worthington starring, and the kind of thing I'm doing at the moment is I'm helping a young, very talented lad that I mentored for years called Humphrey Pittman, who's an actor, and he's just, through his passion for Shakespeare and getting together a budget from wherever he could scrape it, made a one-man show on Hamlet, where he played pretty much all the roles, except for the female ones. And he's just been shooting the flashbacks, and I'm going to help him with the post-production on that, and I've basically been involved just in an advisory role. But I think he's going to go far, as far as he can go in the UK, as far as he can go in Europe. But one thing that Stu, the guy that did The Shack, told me, even as a scriptwriter, if you want to make a lot of money as a scriptwriter, you go to the States. If you want to not be able to pay your mortgage, you stay in the UK and you write scripts. That's where the money is.
Well, I mean, a lot of the talent does live in the UK. I mean, because the UK is a big pool of talent. There are many British actors who are often working on massive Hollywood productions. But I think most of the time they need to be in the UK and go to Los Angeles back and forth. The ties between London, the film business and Hollywood, I think are much stronger than, for example, Paris and Hollywood.
Yeah, there are a lot of directors that go out there from England, like Stu. There are a lot of the special effects are handled in the UK as well. And I've got other friends like...
I think it's just for tax reasons.
Yes, possibly. And we still have good studios. We've got Shepton, Pinewood, and a very good friend of mine set up a company on leaving the Royal Marines. I'd worked with him on recruitment films when he was still in the Marines. He's left, and he's set up a company called Military Film Services Limited, which is basically providing all the military extras, military locations for major feature films that are shot over here. So World War Z, he actually got hold of the aircraft carrier for them. He's worked on Kick-Ass 2, which was actually shot in the UK, and they try and make it look like it's shot in the US. But it actually makes for a more popular film apparently in the ratings when they release it. But yeah, he's worked on Kingsman and Kingsman 2, many other films, and they do shoot over here. The studios do come over here.
Oh yes, well again, I think it's basically because the UK has put in place some extremely good tax incentives or tax rebates. I mean, when I go to Weekend Film Festival every year, there's this whole team from the BFI and who come down. Film UK, I think it's also called, and they explain to you all these tax rebates. For example, Game of Thrones is shot in Ireland, I think, Northern Ireland quite a lot. So that's why they shoot either in Canada, where there are some good tax rebates, or in the UK, some uncapped tax rebates.
It's a good business. English film's been democratised by the advance of technology, so you've got many, many more people coming into it. So there is fierce competition.
Okay. Yes, that's true. But there are low barriers to entry. That's the point I wanted to make before, compared, for example, to fashion, where you need to have quite a lot of stock, a lot of money when you start up your fashion business, because you need to be able to employ some seamstresses to, hire a factory, etc. But in the film business, I think there are very low barriers to entry, and also a lot of film projects are unexploitable. As we said, we're unexploited because only 25% are commercially exploited, apparently. So it means that for me as a lawyer, when I talk to all these film types, I don't really see any business opportunities because there's not your money around.
Yes, I used to date a girl who works in a media law company, and most of her business was trying to reclaim cash from people that didn't provide the goods for their film and went bust partway through. And there are certain rules. You don't make your money back from short films. You can possibly make short films with a view to making a long film. You pitch your short at Cannes or whatever. People generally understand that if you want to be a millionaire, don't work in the film business.
Or in the music business.
Yeah, exactly. They're few and far between.
I think one of the rules of the entertainment industry is that it's a one winner takes all economy. So it's only the 1% who are successful or really make a lot of money out of something. The rest is just barely surviving. So it's tough. I mean, for example, for accountants or lawyers, it's not the same. I mean, there are, of course, much higher barriers to entry into the industry, but then at least more or less everyone makes a decent living. While in creative industry, it's more difficult because there are lower barriers to entry. So only those who are hyperachievers, very successful, very lucky as well, can really make it big.
Yeah, I think you can narrow the odds. You can learn the business as well as you possibly can. Obviously, there are two sides of that. You can learn the creative business. You can learn the actual process of putting a film together. And then also, if you're running your own company as I am, you have to learn pretty quickly the actual process of running a business as well, and how to make it profitable and how to keep it going, which is not something creative types are always particularly good at, which is why they might want to speak with someone like you, because they're someone that knows the process, knows the law, knows the ins and outs.
And accountants as well.
Yeah, exactly right. Actually narrowing the odds. If you work for a long time in a business, you gain a consistency and you know how to produce good work that absolutely suits the client criteria, and you know exactly how to achieve that to the budget, and you can consistently do that. You're narrowing the odds of being able to produce and direct and create at the top level, and I think your budgets will go up. I mean, you'll start perhaps producing with £5,000 to £20,000 to 30. Eventually, you'll be on hundreds of thousands of pounds, and you'll be able to know how to handle that money and get the most out of it, which is always going to be helpful with films, and especially films produced in the UK, which are going to be probably lower budget generally than those produced in the States. It doesn't mean your quality falls. It means that you actually know how to get the best out of every shoot you do.
I think that's great advice, because it means that if you follow a certain rigorous process, then, as you say, you should end up somewhere, really.
Don't be too keen to create your first movie when you're very new to the business.
Sure.
Because as I said, there are many first-time movie directors, very few second-time movie directors. And if you mess up on your first one and you have any kind of budget, then you're not likely to get a second one. And so to get your first feature, you pretty much need to know exactly what you're doing. And that really helps, and it helps in the people that you hire as well. If you're not going to shoot everything yourself, edit everything yourself and do it that way, you'll need to be directing them very closely. So you'll need to be getting very, very good people on board as well that can achieve those kind of effects that you're going for. It's a matter of seeing a vision through from the very outset, and you need to be a storyteller.
I met in Cannes last year a film producer, Jonathan Devin, I think. And then I caught up with him at the Berlinale in February, in Berlin, obviously. I was very surprised by the fact that he's much more interested in the creative side of the process than in raising the money. And
Oh yeah, totally.
I thought that this was the whole thing of being a film producer, that you would be managing the whole process of organizing everything for the film director and also getting all the money and the distribution of the film in place, while the film director would be doing the creative process. But he seemed to think otherwise. So how do you work often in pairs with a film producer when you are a director, or do you prefer to do both? Or what's your view on the role of a film producer?
It's a mixed bag, I think, because you start off. I started off in the creative side of things with 3D animation, but I became a producer, and then I really wanted to get back to directing. I had directed animation, so I tried that.
Yeah.
Producing and directing is a very good way to keep control and power over your projects too. And I pretty much know what I'm achieving and how much it's going to cost and what I need and the time I need to spend on each location and shoot. And if I'm getting gold on that location and if it supersedes another scene possibly, so I'm pretty ruthless with myself. A lot of the time, if you're dealing with a lot of people and it's a matter of not having enough hands to do all the jobs. So you want to work with a producer you get on well with that trusts you. If the producer doesn't trust you, they'll be quite hard on each scene you're shooting, asking you to move on to the next. So that is a good reason to work with people you know and trust. Well, you basically know that you're going to stay within certain boundaries and that you can achieve what you say you're going to achieve. Producing, it can be a lot like accounting.
Exactly, yeah.
Or it can be very creative. Depends on the kind of project you're working on, who you're working with. I used to be a creative producer, so my role was a director really at the BBC and a creative producer. And because I've been a producer for a long time prior to joining the BBC, I had made sure that was on my contract with them, because normally they only accept people as assistant producers and that kind of thing is there. And I'd launched several companies by that stage. So it really varies on the project, and I think the deal's made at the very beginning what kind of power someone's going to have. Normally the producer will be telling the director, okay, that's the limit of our budget now, let's go to the next location. Or we've got to stop here, Sometimes it's very good to keep the director in check, especially if he thinks he's a mad genius and is going to blow the entire budget on one scene. Yeah.
Stanley Kubrick apparently was quite famous for that. Stanley Kubrick. He was doing take after take after take after take. It was exhausting all his actors.
There's a certain billionaire in history as well, wasn't there, who thought he could direct films. And obviously he didn't need a producer because he had all his own money to throw at these things. But studios probably quite tight. Was it Howard Hawks?
Right, yeah. Was he a billionaire, really?
I need to look at my history, goodness knows. But I think unless you've got that kind of money in your back pocket, you need a producer.
A family from Houston and making money out of oil, yes. Where do you see the future of the film industry going? With this revolution, which is very well explained in Side by Side, a documentary produced, I think, and made by Kenny Reeves. He explains really clearly how now almost everything is done on digital, and even the theatres are showing digital copies of films.
Yes.
So where do you see the future of the film industry going in terms technically, and also in terms of how to distribute the content theatre-wise and the internet?
It's hard to know. I mean, I think it's going to be technology driven.
What are the biggest technology trends at the moment?
It's very hard to go by a trend because we thought 3D TV was going to be a big thing and then it turned out to fall flat completely.
I don't like 3D, but when I was at the Cannes Film Festival, I had the option to try and put some 3D stuff on my face and then just lie down on some sort of couch and just pretend that I was in the air,
virtual reality.
Well, right, sorry, yes, virtual reality.
Oh, yes.
I got so sick in the stomach. I mean, the whole afternoon I had the impression I had been sailing at sea with a rough gale. This virtual reality and 3D is just a fad for me.
I don't know, because I think even the nature of making a 3D film is different to making a film that you know is going to be on a flat screen 2D. You can't cut too much. You can't be too cutting edge with your flickery effects, say as in Gamer, which is very much seen as a cutting edge type of film. If you try to put that into 3D, everyone would be, as you say, sick on the couch. But if you look at something like Avatar, the shots had to be slower, more flowing.
Much better by the time.
Well, basically because you had a head, you were wearing glasses and you were in the 3D environment.
I loved it.
To break that was very uncomfortable for the viewer. The whole language of film could potentially change with the advance of technology, whether it be VR or a chip in our head. Who knows? Because it's kind of, who knows where it's going. I mean, they say that in 2045, the chip in our shoe will be 50 times the IQ. An IQ of 10,000 of a human being. Exactly. It's very hard to know where it's going because everything's accelerating as well. Technology is accelerating, which is why nowadays I used to buy cameras all the time and try to keep up to date with them. Now I rarely bother.
You lease them.
Every job requires a different type of camera and different types of lenses. And you'll end up spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on that kind of kit. It'll change in 6 months' time anyway. Yes, you might as well hire. As to whether that's going to happen with the computer systems when we get these Unity-type systems coming in, goodness knows. I do see...
What's that? Sorry, Unity-type systems?
I've forgotten the actual name of them, but they're talking about computers which are far, far more advanced than we have now. That quantum computers, basically, that can effectively, at the moment, they're only good at being programmed to produce one sort of task, but they're saying that in 10 years' time, quantum computers will have a higher IQ than human beings. So
yes,
we have no idea where that could possibly take us.
So how is that going to impact the films?
Every now and then I'm swearing at my computer and thinking I'm wasting half my life waiting for something to render on Maya or in some compositing program.
Yeah.
And I think that will make the whole filmmaking process much, much quicker because you'll have almost a real-time, high-definition sequence coming out as quickly as you can produce it. Which will make the whole filmmaking process a lot easier and, again, will democratize it. But I think that's where we're going.
As long as you can buy your quantum computer, which might be probably quite expensive initially.
Yeah, we'll probably all be their slaves by then, so I don't think we'll need to worry too much about it. But we'll see.
Happy times ahead then.
I do worry, actually, I'm talking about Alex Proyas's concern about the whole way the movie industry is going and its formulaic approach to films. Essentially, given that, you could create an algorithm and dispense with directors and producers and leave the computer to create our entertainment from scratch.
Might be a bit boring.
I don't know.
Content.
I don't know. I think a lot of stuff coming out of Hollywood could be challenged by that. So.
Fair enough. That was an interesting perspective, but you see the technology having such a big impact on content being produced in the future.
It certainly has over the last 10 years. So and
also it's accelerating. In terms of how this content is being distributed, every time I go back to France, I really do have the impression that those continental Europeans are so far behind. I mean, for them, the only two distribution channels which are worth mentioning are TV sets and theatres. And for me, those are two distribution channels which are not really current and relevant anymore. Kids hardly ever go to the cinema, I think. They're not used to being sat down for 2 or 3 hours in a row watching a film. I've never watched TV in my life. I never had a TV set. For me, it's mainly older people who watch TV, really. When I come back to the UK, and definitely when I go to the US, I have the impression that the general public is much more in adequacy with the new distribution channels like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and watching on your tablet and your laptop, but also illegal channels, because a lot of people are moaning that the content you watch on Netflix and Amazon Prime is not basically very new. First, there is a theatre window for the release, and then 1 year later you can see the content online. How do you see all this evolving? What is your view about how we're going to consume content?
I think you can look at the music industry and take a warning from that. Distribution companies that were labels in the old days, they usurped largely by people distributing online, by MP3 download. Streaming, yeah, exactly. It's very hard to know where everything's going, but it does seem as though things are being integrated more and more. Games getting closer to movies.
Okay.
They're all becoming more and more immersive, and the technology that you have is much more easy to hold in your hand, so you can now easily watch a movie on your Samsung. Yeah. This was sort of technology that you looked at in '82, watching something like Blade Runner, with a video phone call, and thought, oh gosh, that's so far away. But
was that in Blade Runner, really? Because it's one of my favourite films.
Oh, mine too. I wrote my thesis on Blade Runner.
By this time, it was really science fiction.
Yes, but it's accelerating so quickly.
Yeah.
Elon Musk is talking about putting a chip, an interactive interface with our brains together that's going to work. So choosing the format of your film and choosing the outcome of your film is probably going to be or your virtual reality or your game. I think it's going to become much, much more immersive. It's all dependent on the technology. Yeah, we'll look back as we do at some old films and think, gosh, how primitive the language is there. And the language is always changing in film. And you've got people at the cutting edge always looking very dated 10, 20 years past the time when they looked cutting edge.
What do you mean the language changes?
The filmic language that you used to talk to people. So there was a lot of play made, especially in the early noughties and the late 90s, of jump cuts and flash frames and creating something where the film was very self-conscious and you were creating something that made people feel like they were watching a music video. And I indulge in a lot of that kind of stuff myself. But as it becomes more immersive, you're forgetting the technology more. You're moving much more into the fantasy world, and the language is getting much closer to our actual reality of our day-to-day. I think that's where we're sort of going. We're going to an alternate reality with technology that is going to become more and more integrated.
A bit in the way that Danny Boyle filmed Slumdog Millionaire, where he just had a camera, just one camera that he could move around with. Yeah, he was always on the move when they were doing that film.
Well, I shot some joint services adventure training stuff with the military in 2007. And GoPro came out straight after that, and the whole way I'd have filmed all our skiing, diving, skydiving, everything else would have been entirely different. I was using massive underwater cameras. I was skiing down mountains with some massive camera over my shoulder virtually.
My God.
And dangling off cliffs, holding these big things too. And nowadays, you wouldn't dream of shooting it that way. You have drones, you have very simple, very high definition, and very beautiful ways of filming things, which is all I've used nowadays. Even the way you shoot stuff has changed. Eventually, we'll probably end up with some camera, goodness knows, and we'll end up living someone else's reality.
Jesus, you don't seem to be. Because for me, I find it quite disgusting. You know, a chip on your brain or a chip on your body, or you don't seem to have a feeling of disgust. Well, for me, it's just really disgusting to add something to your body.
I think almost a lot of jobs nowadays are accepting that they're going to lose their jobs to technology to some extent.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. I think, sadly for you, I think law was one of the ones that was mentioned in the 5 jobs that are definitely going to be taken over by AI.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, I really do see an AI going to stand at the bar and pleading at the bar. It's not possible. AI is going to be useful to do a lot of research more quickly and churning the documents, which frankly, I'm just waiting for that day to arrive. But I think we will still need, for negotiations or trials, we will still need the human beings to be there to do the work. But why not? Frankly, I don't feel too challenged by...
No, sure.
No.
AI or the technology at the moment is accommodating our advances to escapism and entertainment. Hopefully it'll always be something that just entertains, and we won't get into some kind of Matrix nightmare where we're all batteries supporting this great big AI. But yeah, we are.
But for example, it's typically the sort of thing that would disgust me, to have this sort of cable just plugging at the top of your neck here.
Well, you see, having written my thesis on Blade Runner, which I suppose you could equate very closely
it's about replicants, so they're robots.
Yes, and Metropolis, and the idea of the robot taking over and the technology taking over and becoming...
You're talking about Metropolis, a film?
Yes.
I haven't watched it. Yeah, okay.
One
of the best films.
Great film to watch.
One of the best films in history.
Yeah. It was a warning, a bit tongue-in-cheek, and it was also the type of film that I like to watch. And so I suppose I love the fact that technology is democratized and I can pretty much produce anything from my office now, film-wise or video-wise, almost to any sort of spec that my client wants. But yeah, there's that little warning, alarm bell in the back of your head that is telling you asking you where is this taking us? Where are we going with this?
For me, it's not so much alarm bells ringing. It's more, I think I'm quite keen, on understanding the potential of these changes to come. Even for the legal business, as you were saying, since I'm a lawyer, I'm also quite keen to see what's going to happen, because I think it's going to help us to focus on the things where we can add value instead of spending hours on research and stuff like that. I mean, I'd love to have an AI being able to do that instead of my junior or, me sometimes. I'm actually quite excited by all these possibilities. I don't see it as a threat. What I find disgusting is to actually add something on your body to enhance your experience that you're going to get of some content because you have it directly in your brain or in your eye or because you also want to enhance your capabilities and your skills.
That very much leads into the Unabomber Manifesto, or Theodore Kaczynski, and the idea of political correctness and the changing of what it is to be a human being, subject to, as he thought, certain conditioners. Theodore Kaczynski was much more concerned about the technology we use, and saying that what ultimately starts off as an entertainment gimmick to show off to your friends ends up being essential to your business. So a laptop or an iPhone or anything else, ultimately you end up having to have that to run a business and all the programs therein. And so you basically do become, to some extent, subject to the technology in order to run anything efficiently, because other people will always use that.
Yes.
So if ever you had to have this add-on to your brain, which I think for me was right hand. I mean, I think if my competitors were getting away from me, I'd be very tempted to add a few gigabytes up there, you know what I mean?
Oh my god.
Terabytes.
Thank you so much, Phil.
Thank you for listening to our podcast Lawfully Creative, produced by Crefovi Studios. Subscribe to our podcast or catch up with our original shows on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and SoundCloud. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Crefovi and its lawyers on contact@crefovi.com.